A black woman walks into a bank, check in hand. The teller looks her up and down, then sneers. "We can't cash that for someone like you." But when the CEO of the bank storms in moments later, the entire staff is about to learn a lesson they'll never forget. The morning air was crisp, the city alive with the hum of business as people rushed through the streets. Inside the grand lobby of Heritage First Bank, polished floors gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and the scent of fresh coffee lingered in the air. Ava Mitchell stepped inside, her heels clicking with quiet confidence. She was dressed in a sleek navy suit, a statement of both elegance and power. In her hand, she held a check, one that represented years of relentless hard work. Yet, as she walked toward the counter, she could already feel the shift in the air, the subtle glances, the hushed whispers. She was used to it. Behind the counter, James Carter, a middle-aged teller with neatly combed hair, glanced up from his screen. His eyes flickered with something almost imperceptible. Doubt. He scanned her, his gaze lingering just a little too long before he forced a polite smile. "How can I help you?" His tone was professional, but there was something in it, something that made Ava brace herself. She slid the check across the counter. "I'd like to cash this, please." James picked it up, his eyes immediately widening as he took in the amount. $50,000. His expression shifted. The practiced smile vanished, replaced by a tight-lipped skepticism. A beat of silence. Then, a chuckle. Low, disbelieving. This check looks a little suspicious," James said, tapping the paper as if expecting the ink to smudge. "Where did you get it?" Ava's expression remained calm, but a storm brewed beneath her surface. "It's my check." James tilted his head, pretending to consider her words. Then he shook his head. "I'll need to verify this." Ava inhaled slowly. She had seen this play out before. Different locations, different faces, but always the same script. Her voice remained steady. "I have my ID, my account information, everything you need to process this." James didn't budge. Instead, he let out a dramatic sigh, flipping the check over as though searching for something. "Large transactions like this, well, we have to be careful. You understand." Ava understood perfectly. Across the room, other employees were beginning to notice the exchange. A few customers glanced in their direction. The weight of unspoken judgment pressed down on her. Still, she refused to waver. "Then verify it," she said coolly. James hesitated, then turned to his supervisor, Michael Reynolds, a tall man with silver-streaked hair and an air of authority. Michael took the check, barely sparing Ava a glance before muttering something to James. Then, he turned to her, his expression unreadable. "I'm afraid we can't cash this at the moment," he said, his voice clipped. "It doesn't seem legitimate." Ava let the words settle, feeling the familiar sting. Not anger, disappointment. She squared her shoulders, her voice unwavering. "And what exactly makes you think that?" Michael's lips pressed into a thin line. "It's just protocol. We need to verify the source." Ava exhaled, gripping her purse a little tighter. Protocol. Right. She could argue. She could demand to see a higher-up. But instead, she simply reached into her pocket, pulling out her phone. A slow smile formed on her lips as she dialed a number. Because in a few moments, this entire bank was about to learn a lesson they would never forget. James shifted uncomfortably as Ava lifted her phone to her ear. He glanced at Michael, who simply crossed his arms, convinced that whatever call she was making wouldn't change a thing. Ava, however, remained composed. As the line connected, she spoke in a tone so calm, it sent a ripple of unease through the room. "Good morning, Richard. I'm at Heritage First Bank, and we seem to have a problem." James furrowed his brows. Michael smirked, arms still folded. Whatever game she was playing, they weren't buying it. Then, through the speakerphone, a voice crackled to life. "Ava, what's wrong?" James stiffened. Michael's smirk faltered. Ava's gaze never wavered from the two men in front of her. "I handed over a check for $50,000. The teller and the branch manager here believe it's fraudulent." Silence. Then, the voice, now sharp, controlled. "What did you just say?" Michael's posture stiffened. His name, Richard Holloway, CEO of Heritage Financial Group, the parent company of this very bank, was not just anyone. And from the way he spoke to her, it was clear this wasn't some casual acquaintance. James swallowed hard. "Ma'am, there's no need to." Ava held up a hand, silencing him effortlessly. "Apparently, I don't fit the profile of someone who should have a check this size." Richard's voice dropped into something dangerously quiet. "Put me on speaker." Ava obliged, pressing the button. The room, already tense, seemed to freeze. "Who am I speaking to?" Richard demanded. Michael licked his lips before stepping forward. "This is Michael Reynolds, branch manager. Sir, we were just following protocol." "Protocol?" Richard's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Tell me, Michael, exactly what part of our protocol allows you to accuse a member of our board of fraud?" James nearly choked on his own breath. Michael blinked, his face rapidly losing color. Ava let the words sink in, before adding, almost casually, "Oh, I forgot to mention that part." Murmurs spread across the bank. "Board member." A few employees exchanged panicked glances. Customers who had been quietly watching now leaned in closer. Michael's mouth opened, then closed. No words came out. Richard exhaled sharply. "Ava, I sincerely apologize for this disgraceful treatment. I will handle it personally." Ava nodded, unfazed. "Thank you, Richard. I'd appreciate that." She ended the call. For the first time since she walked in, the power dynamic had shifted completely. Michael took a slow step back. His entire demeanor changed. "Ms. Mitchell, I deeply regret the misunderstanding. We, of course, will process your check immediately." Ava tilted her head, amusement flickering in her eyes. "Now it's a misunderstanding?" James, still gripping the check, looked like he wanted to vanish into thin air. I was just doing my job," he stammered. Ava let the silence stretch before responding. "No, you were doing what you thought was your job. Gatekeeping wealth based on your assumptions." The words landed, hard. Michael looked like he wanted to argue, but wisely kept his mouth shut. The tension in the room was suffocating. Ava exhaled, checking her watch. "I have another meeting soon. Are we done here?" Michael scrambled to action. Yes, absolutely. Right away." As James hastily keyed in the transaction, hands slightly trembling, Ava simply waited, knowing this was only the beginning of the lesson they were about to learn. The once smug and confident James now moved with jittery hands, tapping frantically on his keyboard, his eyes darting between the screen and Ava's check. The tension in the room had shifted so drastically that the weight of his earlier arrogance now pressed heavily on his shoulders. Michael, still standing stiffly beside him, forced a thin, uneasy smile. "Ms. Mitchell, please understand. There was no ill intent here. We just have security measures in place for large transactions." Ava tilted her head slightly, letting his words hang in the air before responding. "Security measures," she repeated, her voice calm, but razor-sharp. "Tell me, Michael, when was the last time you refused to cash a check for a $50,000 transaction from one of your other clients?" Michael's lips parted, but no words came. Ava already knew the answer. She folded her arms, gaze unwavering. Let me guess. It's a rare occurrence that someone like me walks in with that kind of money. So instead of verifying my credentials, like you would for anyone else, you made an assumption. James shrank lower in his seat. The room was silent, save for the nervous clicking of keys. Ava's voice was even, but every syllable carried a weight that couldn't be ignored. This isn't just about me, she continued. I could have been anyone. A small business owner trying to cash a hard-earned check, a retiree withdrawing funds, a single mother finally receiving a settlement, and they would have been treated the exact same way. Michael cleared his throat, shifting his stance, as if the discomfort in his body could somehow rid him of the truth weighing down on him. We don't discriminate, Ms. Mitchell, he insisted, but even he didn't sound convinced. Ava let out a soft chuckle, void of humor. No, of course not. You just delay, deny, and dehumanize. James's fingers slipped on the keyboard, making a small error beep sound that made him flinch. Ava simply watched. He finally found the courage to meet her gaze, swallowing hard. I apologize for the misunderstanding, he muttered, still trying to save face. Ava took a step closer, lowering her voice just enough that the words landed like a whispered storm. Misunderstanding, she repeated. Let's call it what it is. Bias. Whether it was conscious or not, you looked at me and decided I didn't belong. And now, you're just scrambling because you learned I own the very institution you tried to shut me out of. Michael let out a slow, controlled exhale. Ms. Mitchell, please. If you'd just allow us to process the transaction, we can move forward. Ava let the words linger before speaking. Oh, you're going to process my transaction, Michael, she said. But moving forward? That's not up to you. The words sent a ripple of unease through the staff, who were now watching with rapt attention. Just then, a tall man in an expensive charcoal suit stepped through the bank's glass doors. His polished shoes clicked against the marble floor as he strode forward with purpose. Richard Holloway. Michael stiffened immediately. James froze. Even the customers took notice as the CEO of Heritage Financial Group walked directly toward Ava with a look that was equal parts concern and contained fury. Ava, Richard greeted, his voice filled with something the others hadn't expected. Respect. I came as soon as I heard. Ava turned to him, finally breaking her gaze from James and Michael. I appreciate it, she said smoothly, though I have to say, it's been quite the experience here today. Richard nodded, his jaw tightening. Then, he turned to Michael and James. Would either of you care to explain why my board member, your boss, was humiliated in front of customers and staff? Michael tried to speak, but only stammered. James had turned an unnatural shade of red. Ava simply waited, knowing the reckoning had only just begun. The weight of Richard Holloway's presence settled over the room like a thick fog. The once smug and dismissive air Michael and James had carried evaporated in an instant. Michael, his confidence now shattered, forced a nervous chuckle. Sir, I assure you, this was just a misunderstanding. We were simply following protocol? Richard's voice was eerily calm, but the steel in his tone made the hairs on James's arms rise. Tell me, Michael, when exactly did our protocol include publicly humiliating a board member of this bank? Michael's face twisted into something that was supposed to be a smile, but it looked more like a grimace. Of course not, sir. We didn't realize who she was. Richard let out a slow breath, shaking his head. Then, with an icy, deliberate tone, he asked, And tell me, Michael, if she hadn't been a board member, if she had just been another black woman walking into this bank, Would your decision have been any different? Silence. The room held its breath. Ava finally spoke, her voice as smooth as glass, but sharp enough to cut. That's the real question, isn't it? She turned slightly, addressing everyone in the bank, not just James and Michael. Because I've been here before. Not this exact branch, not this exact bank, but in a room just like this, standing across from men just like you, being told that my success was somehow suspicious. James shifted uncomfortably, gripping the edge of the counter, as if it could somehow keep him from collapsing under the weight of her words. Ava took a step closer, her heels clicking against the marble floor. You see a woman like me walk in here with a check, and instead of processing it like you would for anyone else, you assume I don't belong, that the money can't be mine, that I must have stolen it. Michael swallowed hard. That's not fair, Ms. Mitchell. Fair? Ava's voice remained calm, but the power behind it was undeniable. Tell me, Michael, do you think it was fair when I had to sit here and watch you whisper about me? When I had to listen to your teller call my money suspicious? When I had to prove that I belonged in a bank that I own? Michael's mouth snapped shut. He knew there was no defense. Richard exhaled sharply, looking between the two men. You've embarrassed this company today, he said, his voice low and dangerous. Not just in front of a valued board member, but in front of every employee, every customer in this room. He gestured toward the lobby, where people had been watching the exchange in stunned silence. Michael looked as if he wanted to melt into the floor. James's fingers trembled against the keyboard. Then Richard delivered the final blow. Effective immediately, you are both suspended while an internal review takes place. Michael jolted. Sir, please. Richard's stare was ice. I don't want to hear a single excuse. He turned to James. And as for you, if you can't treat every customer with dignity, then you don't belong here. James opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked at Ava, desperation flickering in his eyes. But Ava just lifted her chin, unbothered. The silence was deafening. Then Richard turned back to Ava. I'll personally ensure that changes are made, effective immediately. No more protocol used as an excuse for discrimination. Ava studied him for a long moment before finally nodding. Good, she said, because I won't let this happen again. She turned toward the counter. Now, if we're done here, I'd like my money. James, still visibly shaken, fumbled with the final transaction. The machine whirred, counting out crisp bills. Ava took the envelope, gave him a pointed look, and without another word, slipped it into her purse. Then she turned on her heel, walking out of the bank with the poise and power of a woman who had just reclaimed the space they tried to keep her out of. The heavy glass doors of the bank swung shut behind Ava, but inside, the air remained thick with tension. No one spoke, no one moved. The once bustling bank, filled with the hum of transactions and polite small talk, now felt like a crime scene where two men had just sealed their own fate. Michael wiped a hand across his forehead, swallowing the lump in his throat. Mr. Holloway, sir, Richard lifted a single hand, silencing him. Enough. Michael flinched. Richard turned to address the remaining staff, his voice sharp, cutting through the silence like a blade. Let this serve as a lesson to every single person here, he said. If I ever hear about another customer, any customer, being treated the way Ms. Mitchell was today, there will be no suspensions. There will be terminations. A murmur spread through the employees, some shifting on their feet, others glancing nervously at each other. The lesson had been learned, but the damage had already been done. Richard exhaled, then turned back to Michael. You're to clear out your office. effective immediately. Michael's jaw dropped. Wait, you said suspension. You can leave. Richard cut him off, his patience long gone. You're the manager of this branch. Your job is to lead by example, and today, you showed exactly what kind of example that is. We don't need it. Michael's face flushed deep red, but he knew there was no way out. He nodded stiffly, then turned, walking toward his office with slow, heavy steps, the steps of a man who had lost everything in a matter of minutes. Then, all eyes fell on James. The young teller looked even worse, ashen, shaken, his hands still trembling over the keyboard. He had started this day with arrogance, with power. Now, he was just a man who had played himself. Richard stared at him for a long moment before speaking. "You're young," he said, his voice quieter but no less firm. "You made a mistake. But I need to know. Do you even understand why?" James swallowed hard. I thought I was just doing my job," he said weakly. Richard let out a slow sigh, shaking his head. "You weren't." He took a step closer. "Your job is to serve every customer with respect, not just the ones who look like you, not just the ones you assume are safe." James didn't respond. He couldn't. Richard studied him a moment longer before making his decision. "You're suspended until further notice. Report to mandatory bias training next week. If you fail to complete it, consider this your last day." James nodded quickly, relief washing over his face. He had been given a second chance, but he knew it would never be the same again. Richard exhaled, finally turning back to the rest of the bank. "We will be implementing new anti-discrimination training for all employees," he announced. "This isn't just about one incident. It's about making sure this place serves everyone, not just the ones you're comfortable with." There were no objections, no arguments, because no one wanted to be the next Michael. Outside, Ava walked to her car, the weight of the encounter still sitting in her chest, not as anger, but as something deeper, something tired. She had won. She had proven her point. But why did she have to prove it at all? She took a slow breath, gripping the envelope in her hand. This had never been about the money. It had been about who gets to belong. And today, she had made it very clear. She did. She always had. And no one was ever going to question that again. Ava sat in her car, fingers resting lightly on the steering wheel, her thoughts still lingering on everything that had just unfolded. She had walked into that bank expecting a routine transaction, and instead, she had been forced, once again, to remind the world of her worth. She let out a slow breath, staring out at the towering bank building in her rearview mirror. It was a reminder of something she had always known, but had hoped, foolishly, might have changed by now. Some doors don't open for people like her unless she kicks them down. But she had kicked that one down today, and she had made sure that it stayed open for the next person who walked in expecting respect, not resistance. Her phone buzzed beside her, a message from Richard. "Changes are already in motion. Thank you for holding us accountable." Ava allowed herself a small smile. Accountability. That was all she had ever wanted, because at the end of the day, this wasn't just about one bank, one check, or one humiliating encounter. It was about a system that still, after all this time, made people like her prove, again and again, that they belonged. And today, she had reminded them all. She exhaled, started the car, and pulled onto the road, letting the city swallow her up once more. But this wasn't just her story. How many people had stood at counters just like that, check in hand, denied not because of numbers, but because of assumptions? How many had walked away quietly, taking their dignity with them, but leaving the injustice untouched? Have you ever been in a situation like this? Have you ever felt dismissed, underestimated, or treated unfairly just because of who you are? Drop your story in the comments. I want to hear it. Let's talk about it. Because the more we speak up, the more we remind the world that we belong. And if you believe in standing up, in making sure stories like this get told, hit that like button, share this video, and don't forget to subscribe. Because this is just one story of many. And we're just getting started.